Good morning, everyone. We're just about to start, so if you could start taking a seat, that would be great. Thank you. This session is Collaborating at the Edge, and it's a part of our terrestrial connectivity track, which is sponsored by Converge Business. And we'd like to thank all of our other sponsors for their support of the event as well. We've got a great group of speakers here for you today, including our moderator, Michael Elias, who's the Vice President of TMT Communication Infrastructure with Cohen. Over to you, Michael.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Collaborating at the Edge panel. I hope you found your time at ITW productive thus far. My name is Michael Elias, and I lead the Data Center and Content Delivery Network Equity Research Practice at the Investment Bank Cowen. I'll be your moderator for this session, and for this session, we're joined by 5 distinguished gentlemen. Pleasure to have all of you here. And instead of me butchering the introductions, I think it'd be best to turn it over to you guys and ask you to introduce yourselves, give a brief overview of your company and your role at the company, if you could. And we'll start with you, Raul.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Raul Martinek, I'm the CEO of DataBank. DataBank is a US-based co-location provider. We're part of the Digital Bridge group of companies. And today we operate about 70 assets in 26 US markets. So obviously the panel today is about the edge, and we think the edge is about geography, and we have the largest geographic footprint of any data center operator, public or private, in the US.
Philip Marangella, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at EdgeConneX. Also a data center operator, been around for about a dozen years. Obviously expansive presence across North America, but in the most recent years, significant expansion globally throughout EMEA, expanded to LATAM, and especially last year, expansion into China, India, and 2 weeks ago, Indonesia. So aggressive global expansion.
My name is Jeff Barber. I'm a partner and EVP of Sales and Marketing with Prime Data Centers. We're a designer, developer, operator of data centers. We're a little global at this point with projects in Europe, many across the United States. We tend to focus on, obviously, hyperscalers, large enterprises. So kind of a classic developer and operator of data centers.
All right. Hey, good morning. My name is Jim Bowie. I'm the president of Involta. We're a national hybrid IT services provider. We're actually celebrating our 15th year this year in business. But we certainly have data centers throughout the U.S., cloud services, as well as other managed IT platforms.
So Jason Shepard, I lead ecosystem efforts at a company called Zadita. We're a startup based out of Bay Area, California. You can think of us as VMware Lite, so extending those types of capabilities that you would see in the data center around management and security, like even further out into different edges out in the field. It's kind of a coincidence, so it's really because it's a Z, but I represent the edges that are like on the fringes of the data center. So I'm like, hey, how's it going over here?
Way over here.
Because yeah, there's no single edge, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So to that point, I think what I want to start off with is a definitional question. So, and I guess we can kick off with Raul and Jeff. When we say the word edge, it's become clear that it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. How would you define the edge and what it means, and for that matter, what it doesn't mean? Start with you, Raul, if possible.
Sure. So, from a data bank perspective, obviously, I think the edge question is about, what's your business model? Obviously, we're a data center operator, so when I think about the edge, I think about it from the perspective of a data center developer and kind of what that means. I mentioned geography. We do think the edge is obviously, a trend towards the decentralization of kind of infrastructure, compute, storage, applications. If you think back at, 5-6 years ago, most people would deploy kind of a web scale application in a classic, east, central, west. They'd pick Ashburn, they'd pick Dallas or Chicago, they'd pick Santa Clara. And, what we saw through our journey, because we started in one of those markets, but kind of it expanded to these secondary markets, we saw that customers were seeking out other locations beyond those kind of 3 core locations. So for us, edge is about that geography. It's about why we built a platform that, extends now into, over 25 U.S. markets that covers a large portion of the population. What we don't think edge is about form factor, right? And, we do have an investment in a modular data center business. we think that's part of the edge, but it's not a definitional question, right? So you can have a very large data center in Los Angeles and it be an edge data center, and you can also have a micro data center in Los Angeles and that could be an edge data center. So they don't, the form factor isn't kind of the definition. It's more about, what is the purpose of that deployment there? Is it trying to serve kind of local consumption for some reason? And that ultimately is what we think will drive this kind of decentralization trend, is that quest for localization.
Yeah, I received this question, ahead of time, and I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be easy. Then I started thinking about it more. Had the classic definition in my mind, right? The edge of the distributed IT environment, getting workloads closer to the periphery of the network for an enterprise. And I thought, well, that doesn't really fit any longer. Kept thinking about it, and I was going to steal something Jason said on one of his podcasts, but then I learned he'd be on the panel regarding a cake and frosting and sprinkles, and I'm like, oh, that's a good one, but I can't use it now. It truly is, in my mind at least, with a background in mostly data movement with companies like EMC and Oracle and HP. In my mind, it's more of a construct, especially now. The edge it means so many different things to different individuals. So yes, the edge might be moving data from a core to an edge, as the classic definition is. I personally think that to many users, the edge is processing at the edge in a remote location. They need that to be, a tier 3 data center with 5 megawatts. And to others, the edge is a sensor on a water pump in a remote location. To others, it's a micro data center. To others, it needs to be very robust, more than N. So, like I said, to me, it's a construct. You need to qualify whoever you're speaking with. There are so many different definitions depending on where you're coming from. It's nearly impossible to assume a standard definition of what is the edge. It's evolved so much, obviously driven by technological advancements, virtualization advancements, hardware advancements such as NVMe or SOC or ARM or any of the things we can do now in the hardware, allowing software-defined networks as an example. All those things are interdependent. So in my mind, I hate to punt, but I can't give you one definition. I'm not going to try. So.
All right. Well, piggybacking off of that point, I guess I'll go to Jason for this. Given your work with the Linux Foundation, do you think, and after that response, I think the answer is clear. Do you think we've gotten any closer to having a universal industry standard definition for the edge? And if not, do you think one will emerge in the future?
For the edge or for the technologies that power it, or both?
For both.
Both. No. I mean, well, yes and no. So we have, people are still very confused about what it is, and it's kind of the hammer and nail syndrome. Is the edge is what I try to sell you, and then that's everything else is what it is. But as Jeff was saying, it's a continuum, and a lot of people are confused because it is complex, and it's really about moving capabilities, compute, storage, networking, as close as both necessary and feasible to the assets or people that need it, and it's still very early. So step one is getting people on the same page and understanding inherent trade-offs, and no, there isn't one size fits all. You can't use the tools we've used in the data center or in the cloud over the past number of years and just extend them out to the all the way out into the physical world. Principles, yes. And we're going to start coalescing around these common principles around cloud native approaches, platform independence, loosely coupled functions that I can kind of rapidly interchange and create new types of offers. All the things that we've built in the data center and learned in the cloud, the whole goal here is to move it as far out and back into the physical world, and then where you run things from in the physical world applications all the way up through regional metro edges all the way up into the cloud. It's just a balance of performance, cost, safety, security, etc. So it's going to take some time. I think it's necessary that we get to some level of interoperability, and that's what we're working on within Linux Foundation and a bunch of other consortia to reach the real potential, which of course I'm sure we'll talk more about. But it's going to take some time. The worst thing that we could do, because of the location affinity, because of the fragmentation out in the physical world, is to have everybody try to own their own platform. It's a bad idea. It's like trying to own the internet. We'll chat about it more, but it's yes and no. It's necessary that we get there, but it's going to take some time.
My next question for you guys will be for Jim and Philip. In your conversations with customers, when you say the word edge, does it resonate with them? And if so, what do the enterprises most commonly associate the edge with? Is it low latency? Is it cost savings? What is it that's resonating with them?
Yeah, I can take that first. I think proximity or closeness is what we hear from our clients, and we serve a lot of healthcare and manufacturing, so they think manufacturing thinks about IoT devices is the first thing that comes to mind. I think similar with healthcare, if you've been in a hospital anytime recently, the number of IoT devices. So I think primarily that's what we hear from clients. They're thinking less so about cost. I really think our customers want to talk about the outcomes. I think Jason said it very well. It is about proximity and what are the business outcomes that we can create, whether it's a patient outcome or it's a manufacturing outcome, is really what we hear from our clients.
Yeah, so kind of to touch on your earlier question too, on both the definition and what the customer thinks about the edge. For us, again, the customer defines it, right? And as Raul, you said, the form factor doesn't matter. Yeah. We will build where they need it, when they need it, how big they need it, and the scale from there. And what the drivers for them, for us, the first wave is around content, getting the content closer to the eyeballs. And that's what, and those were tier 2, tier 3 markets, right? You wanted to serve instead of, the Phoenix market, instead of out of one Wilshire, you wanted to bring it close. And so you had a content ecosystem kind of go to a much more distributed fashion to these tier 2, tier 3 markets for both performance and for cost. Second wave that we're in the middle of is cloud, right? Going beyond the big, I live in Ashburn and Silicon Valley and the big hubs. And, in Europe, the FlapD and Singapore and there's like 17 major markets in the world, pushing the cloud closer to the enterprises. And again, same for performance and for cost. And then the next wave you're going to see will center around a lot of this machine learning, the AI, the metaverse, and so forth, which will continue to push this distributed architectures. But that doesn't mean Ashburn goes away. The two work in harmony. Mm-hmm. And as what an edge for one person is different from another, and they might have two in tandem, both the core and the edge, to kind of have the kind of consistent user experience that they want to achieve for their end users and customers, whether it be gaming, whether it be, like I said, cloud or what have you. So again, very much customer defined in terms of where and how big that edge should be.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
I'm seeing some meaningful things, happening with customers, and then there's also a lot of people, edge. There's a lot of edge washing out there right now. It's like customers are learning how to spell edge. They come to you, I want to buy some edge computing. It's like, okay. What are you trying to do? What's the outcome? Like, when I started earlier on with IoT, I want to buy some IoT. What color would you like? Yeah. It's like, so really it's about the outcomes, and we're still kind of figuring it out, but infrastructure is a key part of that.
I completely agree. And I want to circle back to what you were saying about form factor. In my work as equity research analyst, one of the things that I find, and it's much to my frustration, is the public investors, they associate the edge with these micro-modular data centers. And I remember when we were talking earlier, you were like, so to that point, I just want to ask Jeff and Jim, how do you think of the role that those data centers will play in enabling edge computing? It sounds like it's just one piece of the puzzle, but how do you think about, the role that those play?
I can kick off if that's okay.
Please.
I think there'll always be a place. For micro data centers, it's one definition of the edge, right? With 5G, there'll need to be aggregation points near towers. There'll need to be many, many more of them in buildings. If you understand how 5G works, it's not like normal, 4G cellular. So there'll need to be many, many more micro data centers, perhaps in regular buildings. In our world, we're seeing, just to tie this in a little bit to the last question, I'm seeing hints from our customers about a lot of processing going on at these edge locations, like GPU level processing, rendering. You mentioned, the metaverse. That will take a tremendous amount of compute. So for our customer base, our discussions are more around, 5 to 20 megawatt edge locations, right? Way outside the normal definition of edge. So where do micro data centers play in my world? Not yet. Would love to collaborate if we come across an opportunity, but our conversations typically tend to be, 5 megawatts and above at a minimum.
Yeah, I think for us, modular has a place in the ecosystem without a doubt. I agree with Raul. There's a form factor, and we've seen all kinds of flavors today where you have telco huts being refurbished, central offices being revitalized, cable companies making their head-ins into co-location spots. So I think it is, it's part of the ecosystem. I think what we've seen so far demand-wise are the regional data centers continue to be the primary place within reasonable latency, especially in the tier 2, tier 3 markets. We're able to create, with the current demand, proximity that's necessary to serve those business outcomes. But I think there's a play. I'd certainly like to see the cost. I don't think every modular data center needs to be an Uptime Institute Tier 3 facility, but we'd like to see some of the cost and the fabricators of these modular units get those costs down, be innovative. I don't know if we can 3D print a modular facility yet. We're not there, but as those costs comes down, I think it'll be more practical to make those a bigger part of the ecosystem.
Gotcha. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's on, so DataBank, we made an investment in a company called Edge Presence in, I think it was October of 2020. So they were, your classic modular provider, data center operator. We've deployed about 5 of those modules so far. The way I look at the micro data center is you really got to have what I say is a geographically specific workload. And that's where the power of the micro data center comes in. I mean, if you think about what a data center is, what does it deliver for customers? It delivers multi-tenancy, it delivers carrier neutrality, it delivers interconnection, it delivers compliance. We're actually seeing the opposite. We wanted kind of an N or an N+1. Our customers pushed us for a 2N type of deployment because ultimately you're delivering that same kind of experience that's in a $50 million data center, but in a 15 cabinet type of enclosure, and really that's what people are seeking. But then in addition to that, there has to be a very, very specific reason why you can't use a traditional data center, which is 5 miles away, 10 miles away, 20 miles away, and any major metro market. And for us, so far, we have found a couple use cases that we think make sense. Really, they revolve around network connectivity. Because if you think about it, right, networks are expensive to move, so that when there's a kind of point where you need some of these networks to come together, and there isn't a traditional data center to create that experience that I just described, then the modular becomes a good fit. So I think it is going to be part of the landscape. I think it's still really, really early. Obviously, there's been a number of players that have kind of pure plays like Edge Presence in the space. I think we're all been in the same boat where, more of a solution looking for a problem, but these problems are starting to arise. And I think, you got to be kind of in the game to be able to surface them. So, we've been satisfied with kind of that experience and now understanding kind of how to use that solution for different situations, and we think more will pop up, but it's still really early days at the end of the day.
Okay. Yeah. My question for you, Raul, was going to be, how do customers essentially think about what workloads go into one of those data centers versus, DataBank regionalized data center? And from your response, it sounds like if there isn't a regionalized data center, in the immediate area, that's when, you would look to put one into a micro data center. Am I understanding that correctly, or, is there any clarification?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it well in terms of, thinking about the customer, right? So A term that you've probably heard out there is like the hyperscale edge, right? So obviously the cloud guys have really big growing business. It's been predominantly served out of a small number of locations, and again, you guys know as much as you read about some of the announcements, right? Obviously AWS with their local zone product, which if you think about it, their first local zone was in LA, and it was December of 2020 when they announced it. Then you had COVID. It was pretty much delayed for a year. Then it was kind of delayed for technical reasons because that machine, the feature set of a public cloud, to replicate that and put it into a small form factor is a very challenging technical problem, right? So you got to figure out how to kind of disaggregate all those components and allow kind of this remote, cloud node to be able to synchronize with kind of the core nodes, right? And look, the EC2 and S3 are still the predominant revenue source for these guys. So they, really what these local zones are kind of a way to push that compute and that storage product, which is their bread and butter, into more geographies in anticipation that there's going to be workloads that are going to need to have that compute and that storage. So AWS has been very clear about their roadmap, and again, you can read about all the local zones that they deployed in the US. Microsoft obviously has the Azure Edge zones. They've been, in our view, a little less aggressive than AWS, and then kind of Google and Oracle really haven't been on the map at all, right? I mean, obviously Google as a search engine, you could argue, was already a large edge player because they had all these caching nodes everywhere. And I'm sure all the data center operators here have Google in some of their facilities because these guys have been pretty aggressive over the years to make sure that product operates the way it does and responds the way it does. But from a kind of core compute storage, Google hasn't done that. Oracle, obviously, with its database product, starting to think about that. So that would be kind of one customer use case, and we think that's one is real, it's live, it's generating demand today. We've have a lot of those deployments across our footprint. And then, another one, obviously talked about content. That one has always been around. And then the final one, I think, is about kind of the network or mobile edge, right? And that's something that really hasn't evolved yet. People talk about CRAN, but, when you go look out there and see what the wireless guys are doing, these guys are so busy just trying to, incorporate their mid-band spectrum into their offering. Obviously, Verizon's getting and AT&T are behind where T-Mobile is, and people are just using macro sites at the most part to deliver that 5G experience. And to your point, no one's really created a standalone 5G network, which really would have important implications for edge deployment. So I think the mobile edge will be another thing that emerges over the next couple of years as their CapEx cycle switches away from lighting up the kind of the layer cake, as they call it, on spectrum, and go deeper into the network in terms of CRAN with front haul, back haul, and then a totally decentralized core where you can marry applications with connectivity. But I think that's 5 years from now. So those are some of the kind of trends that we see, and ultimately, it's our job isn't to push those trends along. Our job is to make sure that we've developed good inventory in a large set of geographies that's well connected, so that when those technology trends advance, there's a place to deploy that, and that doesn't become the bottleneck, is kind of the way we look at it.
All right. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit to dovetail on some of the points that you made. But, with the evolution of the edge, the pendulum of compute is swinging from the centralized compute of the cloud to the decentralized model at the edge. As we think of the cloud service providers, we've seen Amazon, as you mentioned, with the local zones, and Microsoft announced their Azure Edge zones. So a question for Jeff and Jason would be, how do you see the hyperscale edge evolving over the coming years? And would love to start with you, Jeff.
Sure. I think that's a bifurcated answer. Just to tag along on the large cloud providers, AWS as an example. I think they are coming across as aggressive now, as recognizing the need for localized compute and storage. I think that's because they missed the 8 ball years ago. Microsoft got it early that hybrid had to continue. Certain workloads simply do not fit in the cloud. Depends on who you believe, but Gartner says 75, 80% of enterprise data is still in the enterprise. The growth of the cloud has been, made it look as if it's greatly amplified. So I think that hyperscalers such as AWS, I think Azure already got it, as I said, Google already gets it. I think they will continue to grow their definition of edge in order to capture more customers. Right? I simply can't have a relational database going back to an AWS location, 100 miles away. It doesn't work. I have data sovereignty concerns. I have security concerns, right, wrong, or indifferent. S3's had a lot of big, high-profile faults and issues in the past. So I think that's what they're trying to address. And then if we move to the second part of that answer, hyperscalers, is that say a Meta, or is that a large social media company? I'll roll that into the hyperscale definition. I actually think that their edge will be slightly different. I think the very large players will be laying their own fiber. They already are. We see what many of these companies are doing today, where those dedicated networks, because they have to have no jitter from a latency perspective. They need to deliver to an SLA. They need to deliver a user experience. I think that their dedicated networks will have, like I said, larger data centers on their networks. They'll become like a carrier. And there'll be a lot of processing going on at the edge there. There'll be a lot of rendering. If you think of the promise of the metaverse, which I personally think will work and will explode. That's a controversial opinion. But all the processing that goes into the imaging and the conversations or the creation of content or the renderings of images, in a virtual table in front of you, those are typically GPU workloads, and those can't be far away. So I think it will continue to grow, and I actually think there'll come a tipping point where more data and more work is actually done at the edge, and we're actually sending metadata back to the core at some point, in one definition of the edge. So I think it'll just become more critical for the hyperscalers.
Jason, would love your thoughts.
I mean, clearly the hyperscalers cloud scalers are looking at edge as a way to grow their footprint, and lock more customers in. Cloud, the big migration to cloud in general, public cloud over the past 10, 15 years has been the lure of easy button over having to host your own infrastructure and all that. But as data starts to flow more and more, I mean, the whole model for the cloud is make it super easy to get data in and very expensive to keep it there and get it out. It's like the mafia in a way. Easy, can't, once you try to get out, they can put you right back in. So now, let's replay that out at the edge, which is makes sense, but it takes that same lock-in out into the field, and I think that we're starting to see that backlash. People realize, I'm getting the bill. And so things are going to change. I mean, you look at, any kind of ecosystem, it usually always starts with some, locked-in, siloed play, and then open wins in the end for scale. I've spoken as an iPhone user. An iPhone comes out, and it's like completely siloed, vertical stack, great experience, but it comes with a bill. And then Android comes out, and things kind of open up. And Android has like 90% market share. A lot of people don't realize that, but I think we're getting to the point where things will increasingly be decoupled. We want the principles of the cloud, the easy button, but also have flexibility to run different types of workloads and different stakeholders coming together. The real potential is interconnected ecosystems, crossover from retail into the home and smart cities and supply chains, and having all of these different things coming together without open infrastructure, without interoperability, you're just never going to reach the full potential. So I think we're going to see a lot of stuff play out. I say edge is the last battleground for customer retention. Used to be a lot of the big, of course, the telcos, the big hardware OEMs, infrastructure players, Dells, HPEs, and whatnot. The cloud has sucked up a lot of those customers, and now they're actually building their own hardware, so that cuts out your HPEs and Dells and all that. As they come to the edge, now all those players are basically, now you're competing on my last turf. And so it's going to heat up really quick, and I think the winners are going to be ones that provide that easy button while also not trying to lock people in, because you're just going to miss the full potential. And so it's going to be interesting over the next couple of years.
Agree 1,000%.
Yeah, just to kind of comment that point you made, Raul, around bottlenecks, right? And I think that's what's becoming critical from a user experience perspective, and why you're seeing the hyperscalers invest tens of millions or tens of billions in data center infrastructure. But you look at their network backbones, the amount that they have invested is phenomenal. And I think COVID exacerbated this when we were all at the edge. Our homes were the edge. And we were gaming and streaming and working and doing all this kind of stuff. So the amount that they had to quickly invest to make sure that that traffic, which was traditionally download-centric, is now multi-directional, right? And so these edge data centers are going to serve to help alleviate those traffic bottlenecks as that data gravity shifts to the edge. And things like TikTok, I be honest, I don't do it, but I get tons from my kids. But like the volumes are insane, right? And so that's the role that these edge data centers, I think, will be pivotal in helping route the traffic smartly, whether it stays local, goes to other edges, or back to the core. And I think that's the partnership that we have with the hyperscalers to kind of build out that digital infrastructure supply chain, everything from networks to towers to data centers, collaborating to alleviate and allow all these use cases evolve.
Yep. Phil, that's a great point, because the hyperscalers, they're starting to reach a point where, as you know, in the core markets, they're dealing with gigawatts of kind of a core market, right? And ultimately, it's the too many eggs in one basket. So kind of pushing out and disaggregating that platform into a much more wider range of geographies actually helps them scale, right? Because now they can kind of relieve they constantly have to tether all these buildings together to create kind of that experience where, hey, you can spin up 1,000 VMs if you want, right? And ultimately, they've gotten to the point where these core markets are just too big. So I think that is also driving it, is just kind of the next evolution of scale. And to your point on like TikTok, again, you read the analysts, and Elias, Q4, Q1 were like record leasing quarters, right? And you had a couple of these guys take down 100, 150 megawatts in markets like Chicago and Phoenix and Ashburn, and a lot of that is because they need to tweak something in their platform. Think about a platform that operates and it's 2 gigawatts of compute. Remember, these guys run very high utilization. So in other words, every compute cycle, every I/O is being consumed. That's why they're profitable, right? So all of a sudden there's some new element, a privacy change, a regulatory change, a new feature, and that is a 300 megawatt problem, right? Because ultimately that platform's already running at max capacity. So to add new functionality into that platform requires a boatload of incremental compute, networking, and all this stuff. So it's a pretty crazy dynamic. These things have gotten so big, and ultimately you have to spread them out, and that's why you're seeing the hyperscales do what they're doing.
Yeah, and that also helps explain what we saw from Meta, recently. You mentioned the privacy change. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Phil, going back to you for a second, you've previously written in an article, which I found insightful, that the evolution of the cloud is at the edge, and as latency-sensitive applications and compute-intensive end devices, as these continue to grow, that will pull the cloud to the edge. As we think of the clouds being pulled to the edge, and contextualizing what Raul just said, what inning of the evolution do you think that we're in currently?
I still think it's early innings, right? Second, third innings, and I think, you touched on, local zones and edge zones and so forth. They've mapped out the markets that they want to go to. There's, 2 dozen or so markets beyond the Ashburns and Silicon Valleys where they want to deploy. For us, the other aspect, because we've been largely U.S.-centric in our conversation, is the global edge, right? And that's where we're seeing a ton, because South America was Sao Paulo and Rio essentially to serve that, and you connected into the NAP in Miami. But now you're seeing, Lima and Santiago and Buenos Aires and all those every country is getting significant hyperscale investment and deployment and needs for capacity. Same in Asia, right? And then you layer in things like GDPR and some of the regulations that are occurring in some countries versus others, and you just see a massive investment internationally, right? We went to India. Again, same thing. Predominantly, Mumbai was serving the whole country. It's 1 billion people, and they're discovering TikTok and all that kind of stuff too. So there's even a greater need to build out edge infrastructure in places like India and China and so forth, where one city is the same size as almost half the United States. So that's where you're seeing the next wave of that global edge for the future, and why it's still very early days in terms of the game.
Yeah, and obviously, if you look at Africa, right, everything's getting served out of Johannesburg, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you got a continent that, you can fit Europe, Argentina, and like China inside the African landmass, and basically all the bits or the majority of the bits are originating from, the farthest point on south. So that's unsustainable over the long term, and I think that's what you're describing with some of those other geographies.
Yeah, yep.
All right. This question goes to all of the panelists. And my question for you would be, we talked about the role that the cloud and hyperscalers are going to play at the edge. But my question for you is, where does that leave the traditional telcos in this equation? Do you see them getting disrupted? What is the end state for them here? It'd be great to go in order. So if we could start with Raul, we'd love your thoughts on that.
So I think it's obviously wireline, wireless, right? And obviously some of these guys are both, of course, like the major carriers. So look, we haven't really talked a lot about 5G. I actually really am a big believer in 5G. I've learned a lot of it because of kind of being part of Digital Bridge, being able to dialogue with Alex Gelman, who, is the CEO of Vertical Bridge, so understanding the tower space, Rich Coyle, who's the CEO of Extenet, understanding the small cell space, obviously some of the fiber stuff. So I do think that the mobile operators are gonna be, big players in kind of enabling edge applications. I mean, I don't think they have any kind of delusions that they can compete with the public cloud guys in terms of compute and storage. Obviously, Lumen has tried, and you tell me kind of how successful they've been, right? So I think ultimately you need connectivity, right? There's no way you can disintermediate connectivity. I think AT&T's recent kind of divestitures are kind of a recognition that, hey, we better focus on what we know best, which is how to provide connectivity. So my view is they're going to be, big players from a connectivity perspective, and then specifically that the mobile guys, because of specifically how 5G is kind of set up to allow mobile edge computing and kind of tight coupling of applications with the network. And when you talk to the wireless guys, it's amazing. The first time I was hearing them talk about their network, they describe kind of the way the bits are moving from the RF into the core, and the guy uses microseconds. I'm like, excuse me, what did you say? He's like, microsecond. I'm like, that's 1,000th of a millisecond, correct? He's like, yes. So that's literally where these networks are going. I mean, I think the edge is about the end of latency. It's about kind of the no latency internet and what that will unleash, and none of us know. But none of us knew either in 1995 what was going to happen, right? But that didn't stop us from building infrastructure. So my view is, again, the mobile guys are going to be really big players, and it's specifically because of kind of the, what 5G will do.
1 second.
Yeah, I mean, what's a data center if it isn't connected, right? So it's as I said before, it's that digital infrastructure supply chain, and they're so critical to connecting the service to the end user and so forth. I'm legacy, MCI, Verizon, and Equinix, so I'm all about interconnection, and there's never enough networks in the building to connect. And look, when you talk to the hyperscalers, they're like, and we're any customer, like, what networks do you have? What IXs do you have? What cloud on-ramps do you have, right? And so you want to bring a robust mix of network ecosystem in there to connect to the end user on any device that they're accessing the content or the cloud or the game or whatever it is. And they will continue to be essential in terms of that, that supply chain. So it's a given that they'll continue to play an integral role.
I agree with everything said. I'll tail on to that. Being a wholesale developer, we actually see a lot of our tenants and prospects talking about building their own network into the building, skipping the traditional MMR because we have a single tenant, let's say. Obviously, in a retail colo environment, you're going to have many, many different carriers, as many as possible. So we see the larger folks building out their own fiber. So yeah, that will be disruptive to answer the question, directly. Raul separated, terrestrial-based versus cellular. I think 5G as well will have a huge role. Once it can deliver, the true promise of, no preamble or no synchronization between the device and the data. That's really one of the major advantages to dropping latency. Once we truly have robust 5G networks, which will have to start in major metropolitan cities. So yeah, I think they will be disrupted. They absolutely will not, be going away, but there will be disruption.
No, I agree with the whole panelists here. The telcos have a huge role to play. We're always fighting the speed of light and connectivity. Content can be king in some ways, but connectivity is king, and that data movement in the edge is imperative. The ability to move that data around, that's what our customers are already seeing. And you think about the future edge use cases that we're envisioning, it's going to be about data movement. It's going to be wireless. It's going to be terrestrial. Don't count out Elon Musk with whatever the heck he's doing.
Yeah, Starlink. Yep.
But I like what Raul said about micro. I mean, that's the speed right there that we need.
So we've got serverless architecture, zero trust security, and now zero latency transmission. I like it.
A new world.
So a couple things. First, I agree. Especially 5G, and there's a lot of expertise that goes around building public networks, and the interconnections are important. But private 5G is a threat because private 5G, I see it as much about 5G is hyperlocal, so inherently you have to have infrastructure close to get the promise. So I see that as a threat if the telcos aren't careful, because more and more people are able to deliver those networks. And yes, it requires expertise, but it requires more constrained expertise when you're doing it for a given location, for a given context. So I see private 5G as much about changing business models and who delivers networks as it is the technology. So that's kind of one thing to watch for. Another thing is the telcos often are their own worst enemies, I will say, nicely, bless your heart. Every time a new tech trend comes around, everyone wants to be more than kind of what they do. And so, I want to, with 5G or whatever, IoT, I want to own the platform. I want to, own software and services and things like that. But then often it kind of comes back to you go to your go-to dance move, after some time. The best thing I think the telcos can do, going forward, just like not trying to own the internet, is to invest in open infrastructure, open technologies, and become service providers for service providers. So, started IoT, I was at Dell at the time, started IoT strategy 7 or 8 years ago. I'm like, hey guys, Amazon's going to win round one of the house IoT. This is before Alexa and all that. Why? Because if you build trust with people and you give them value, people will give up some sort of, some level of privacy, and it's a balance. Amazon, of course, has trust. I know my UPS driver by first name. It's cool. And sure enough, they built this ecosystem around it. Now, granted, that was the lock-in play. That was that early thing, that I was saying too, the Apple analogy. But who hits the house first? It's the telco. It's your carrier. What have they been trying to do? Well, own their own platforms for smart home. It's a terrible idea. What you should do is own open infrastructure where you can host workloads from anybody, local retailers, not just Amazon, utilities, healthcare, insurance, cross that over into other businesses. Massive, massive business potential if we all stop trying to own the middle and start collaborating around, the title of the thing, and collaborate around these new types of services. It is not about the plumbing, it's about how you deliver things on top of it. And so I think that's the biggest opportunity for the telcos going forward, is to get out of their own way in terms of trying to own the base and really focus on how you can interconnect all these different business models. There's massive, massive money in it, and you're not just the pipe, which is, of course, very important, if you step back and think about the real potential.
I want to transition and talk a bit about the use cases as we start to come to the end of this panel. What are some of the, and feel free, whoever wants to jump in, can jump in, but from your perspectives, what are some of the more immediate use cases for, edge solutions that you're seeing? We've talked a lot about it, but even on the panel before, it seems like the use cases are still yet to come. So just curious what you guys are seeing. I'll start with maybe Raul.
Yeah, no, that is the trillion-dollar question. Again, think about your phone, think about your use of the internet, either on your phone or at your desktop, and ask yourself, are there any things that you're accessing there that is a problem because of latency or bandwidth? And the reality is, for most people, the answer is no, right? Most of kind of the stuff that's on your phone or on your desktop, you can access it with kind of the current infrastructure and characteristics of the internet, right? The one use case that pops up a lot is gaming, right? Because gaming, if you think about gaming, and it's a big industry, right? I mean, if you got kids, you know how big of an industry it is, and obviously there's probably a lot of people that game here, and I see some young faces in the audience. So, but that, obviously is, that experience, especially multiplayer, happens because there's a device in the house, and all these gaming companies are trying to figure out, okay, how do we do massive multiplayer games, but using kind of, remote compute and remote storage, and there are gaming clouds out there. NVIDIA has one as an example where they kind of run gaming platforms on top of their compute. So I think that's probably one of the ones that will emerge first, and there's a real market for it. And then the other ones, I don't know. Network, I think, network connectivity, I think is an edge type of deployment, because you have to have that, as you mentioned, the ecosystem there. But, obviously we talked about the metaverse, but that's, well into the future. But look, it's no different, again, than, the mid-'90s, right, when people were investing a ton of money and not really sure, what the internet was going to deliver from a profitability perspective. And eventually, innovators and software developers figure it out.
Yeah, I would say, just like we were saying earlier, like a lot of the edge infrastructure today is being built out of necessity as current use cases evolve. I need to improve caching, content delivery, things like that. Of course, lower latency, but the apps for latency that really need like low latency, they're still emerging. So that is a bit of a build that will come. But if we architect it properly now, just for kind of expanding needs for current use cases, it's good. The killer app in practice today for edge is anything associated with computer vision. So cameras, the only people that think it's a good idea to send raw video around are people that sell you internet.
Yeah.
It is about more around the metadata being sent back. Let me process video locally. The old way of doing surveillance was turn on the camera and have someone eating a bucket of chicken and watch the cameras. And if something happens, call your boss or look at the tapes afterwards. And now, of course, it's about real-time processing with machine learning, AI, whatever. But that's all. We're seeing a lot of that starting to pick up, at the edge. We're also seeing, again, it's to deliver services to lots of people, kind of at the edges that we've been talking about today. You have to have the apps, you have to have the whole ecosystem worked out. The people using the apps, there's got to be a use case, all that. It's starting with more kind of for my business. Maybe I run a specific workload for a specific need in a colo data center closer to me or whatever. We're seeing at Zedita a lot of companies that are investing in edge on-prem. Edge, though on-prem without the cloud involved, is just legacy on-prem apps. So this is where, hey, I want to consolidate my SCADA software along with historians, kind of in a manufacturing sense, but I also want to put in cloud services to do pre-processing of data and then send that to the cloud for future training and then push back models for local analytics. We're definitely seeing that happening today in manufacturing, oil and gas, renewable energy, solar, things like that. It's emerging, but it's much more controlled by individual entities versus like this huge broad base of new types of services for lots of customers. I agree, gaming is a big driver right now. A lot of people talk about AR, VR, and all that, but the apps aren't there yet to drive the need. But so we're seeing pockets for sure. But yes, computer vision is a major driver of edge because it's expensive to move data around.
Yeah, I would say for us, just going back to manufacturing and healthcare, I think today the demand we're seeing, manufacturers are still struggling. A lot of the factories aren't connected. They're trying to connect their factories. So a lot of the use cases that are coming to fruition is not only how do we connect the factories, but then how do you manage the process of production? And you have to have edge deployments to be able to do that. So there will be edge native applications that are built that help run and connect all of these factories. I think healthcare is similarly where telehealth, we had hospital systems that had hundreds of telehealth appointments explode to thousands of telehealth appointments. Well, that's the beginning, right? You still aren't doing patient care in the home yet, and a lot of the video and the content you need to be able to truly deliver that. I think way down the road there, future-wise, doctors are talking about, well, you can do robot-assisted surgeries. I'm not going to be the first one to volunteer for that. I don't know about you guys, but I think there's something real there, and that's what the edge will enable. But the use cases we're starting to see now are about home health care. It's building on the telehealth capabilities that are out there and really being able to get to the patients.
Yeah. One thing I'll add, I totally agree. Like, the shift is not just because of the technological needs. It's because people are getting tired of the bill for centralization. Central is easy, but it gets expensive once the data starts flowing. And so some of the shift, why I want to invest in, I'm going to pull back and invest in my own kind of private data centers, maybe co-locate somewhere closer, is I want to take control of my data and my workloads again because I went a little too far. So there's also a business need that's driving things a bit today, not entirely, but it's not just the technical needs, I believe.
I like to say every decision to go to the cloud starts with the spreadsheet, and every decision to come back from the cloud starts with the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Right? So once they analyze it, it looks great up front, and then great, your data is over here. Oh, you would like to access your data, and then the bills start.
Just kidding.
Start mounting, yeah.
We call that a Hotel California.
Exactly.
Once you get in, you can never get out.
Exactly right. Just to build a little bit on something Jason said on this topic, I think it's important to remember that you mentioned gaming and that they're just not there yet. Well, I would say they're not there yet because the infrastructure is not there yet. So, to your point and to what you do, until you have the technological advancements, which always do a dance with demand, like two planets orbiting each other, they're pulling on each other. So right now, I think we're in the stage where there's demand cropping up and the technology is beginning to emerge, mostly related to open systems. Virtualization is, in my opinion, a must because besides consolidation, what virtualization really does for you is interoperability. It allows different platforms from different vendors to interoperate as if they were one. And until we have that stack, I don't think we're going to see the Ready Player One type of worlds where everything looks as if you're truly in that world. But I do think some proximity of that is coming. Some approximation of that, I should say, is coming.
I want to end on with one last question, and it dovetails with a question that we got from the audience. We've talked about edge for years, and I think one question still outstanding is, I think it says there, where is the real monetization for this investment? Said differently, where do the greatest monetization opportunities lie with the edge? So just maybe if we could go like rapid fire down the line, where do you think the greatest opportunity is here?
Well, again, from our perspective, we have leasing in these locations. So there's our monetization event. We're an arms dealer, right? We support any type of technology or any type of deployment. So we'll continue to develop capacity in markets where we see leasing. So selfishly, from a data center operator, that's how I see the monetization.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward as a data center operator. You build it where they want it, and you have 10, 15-year contracts. So it's not necessarily sexy, but what is sexy is what our customers are doing inside the building. And going back to the earlier question, there's a lot of hype around the metaverse, this, that, and the other, but it's still today content, and it's cloud, and it's gaming. These are the core use cases that are driving demand, whether it be for the edge or the core, but any kind of data center capacity. And some of the other stuff, yeah, proof of concept. I mean, it's that shiny object, right? You're saying 5G, I'm already hearing 6G and all this kind of stuff. Like, just focus and execute here and now for the core kind of requirements, and then, it will come. It will come. It's like you said, a solution looking for a problem. The problem's coming, and it is big, but it's that chicken and the egg. When is that tipping point for the next wave? So,
yeah, I certainly agree. I would say in our industry, we're probably the first folks to see the monetization, because we're a service. We're building at the edge. We're building something for the customer. Where is the monetization for one of our tenants, as an example? I think that's just like the definition of edge. That depends on what you're using it for. If you're an enterprise, it may be for disaster recovery or moving a workload that's relational closer to where the work is done. That's avoiding risk. That's ensuring safety. I think that's going to take, personally, I think it's going to take a very large player with a lot of cash coming out with some killer app or some killer game that no one can resist, and that's going to lead to more use cases. You'll see the metaverse more in the enterprise, as an example, than just gaming. I think it will start with gaming, but it will move into the workplace as well. So we have a ways to go, is my point.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously infrastructure, cloud, compute, storage, those things. I also think the value we provide in our industry is really just to be that pairing point and to bring that all of these players together at the right place, at the right depth in the network, at the right location. I think that's how we add value. I think at Involta, we personally have subscribed to, you got to put security around all that stuff. That's a big threat landscape. We talk about this data thinning or proliferation all over the place, so that needs security services. So we like to layer our services capability on top of it, but that's how our go-to-market.
Yeah, I think that's key. If you're only monetizing on quality of service, it's kind of a race to the bottom, because there's it's only so far you can go and differentiate. But adding security services, I always say you make your money on the ITs, usability, security, manageability, whatnot. You don't make your money on the base. I think that's key, and I think that even as infrastructure providers, I keep harping on kind of this open thing, is trying to create your own platform, bad idea, but if you create the tools and help people get that public cloud experience of, I want to pay things as I go, I want to make it easy to, I just want to think about resources, I don't want to think about infrastructure. If you give that to people, but make it to where it's interoperable, and you have partnerships that help people kind of bridge new types of services together and mash things up and discover new types of use cases and business models, but make that easy, that's how I think you differentiate. It's not in what you're selling, it's how you sell it. And so we're moving towards service economy and all that. So I think that's a big thing to think about is to get above quality of services. How do you aggregate things in an open fashion to make it easier for people to mash up new use cases and do things we've never even imagined?
Perfect. Exactly. With that, we're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you for the audience for sticking around.
We've got a bit of a break in here now, but if you're after more sessions, there's an investment panel starting upstairs now with folks from ING, Digital Bridge, etc. So it should be another good panel. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you for our subsea afternoon, later today. Thank you, everyone.